change. Okay, good. So we're going to look at, really it's an independent section that comes at the very end of the material that we looked at last week. It's something which may well be familiar to you because it's taken from the Torah and it's used as the last section of the Shema. You know, there are three biblical paragraphs. The first one, Shema Yisrael, v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. The second one, v'haya im Shemoah. And the third one, which we're going to look at now, has to do with Tzitzit, with putting tzitzis on the corners of your garments, or strings, if you will. So we're, of course, in the book of Numbers, and we are, here we are. We're on page, if you have the Eitz Chaim, we're on page 854. It is Numbers chapter 15, and we're going to begin with verse 37, 15:37. And if someone has Hertz and they want to say out the page, please feel free to do that. But at any rate, chapter 15, verse 37. This parsha, as we read it from the Torah, begins, of course, with the story that we spent some time on, which is the story of the scouts, right? Moses sent in these scouts. They come back largely with a negative report. There's a rebellion, and the people are condemned to wander now for 40 years in the wilderness until their children will be able to go in. And I want to remind you of it only because there is a linguistic connection between this little passage about fringes on the corners of your garments and that story of the scouts. So we'll see that in a minute. On the surface, though, it seems to stand alone. So God says to Moses the following: tell the people of Israel, v'amarta alehem, say to them, asu lehem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem v'doratam. Put fringes on the corners of your garments throughout your generations. Right? So first of all, tzitzit, fringes, not quite clear what that might mean. Whatever it means, and we're going to see in a minute, whatever it means, it's something that will not just be done in the wilderness, not just be done in the land of Israel once they arrive there, but becomes now an obligation of the entire Jewish people for all times. Right? And it's something that we, those of us who put on a talit, we know about because that's the purpose really of the talit. Right? The talit is a fringed garment. And by fringes, we're really talking about the strings in the corner, right? And when we do that, we are, in a sense, fulfilling this obligation, which is now being given to the entire Jewish people. So what's special about it? So on the fringe, you should have this pitel techelet, this cord of techelet, right? So techelet is a color. We know it from Exodus, where it's used as part of the creation of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and it's part of the garments of the priests, and that's important. Where does this dye come from? It seems that the secret of the dye has been lost and was already lost, it seems, maybe in the time of the rabbis. Right? So what do we do with that? There's a variety of rabbinic opinions as to where it actually comes from, what it looks like, what the creature, the sea creature that it comes from looks like. Maybe it's a snail. A lot of people think it's a murex snail. I mean, contemporary people not clear. It seems it was very costly. And again, the purpose of it is, that's what's special about this fringe. In other words, it's not just having a fringe on the corners, but it is the fringe that has this patel techelet, this thread, which is colored with patel techelet. So we know from ancient archaeology that people used to use fringes as a way of sealing documents, that they would make impressions into clay with, like a signet ring. You might take a ring and press it, and therefore that's your seal, and it shows that it was really you who the fringe came from. So fringes somehow are associated with identity, right? And this thread, this techelet thread, is associated with the priesthood, right? Because we know the priestly garments have this as one of their characteristic colors. So this seems to tie to the idea of being, as we saw at the time of the revelation on Sinai, a nation of priests and a holy people, right? In other words, the tzitzit are in some sense a symbol of Israel's election by God, selection by God to represent sort of the priests for the world, right? That our mission is in part to draw the world closer to God, and very much the way the priests draw the people of Israel closer to God, right? So partially, we can see it as a sign that we have a special relationship with God. That's certainly part of it. But it has an additional function here as we go a little bit further. And that is, you'll have this fringe, this techelet colored fringe, uri'item oto, and you'll look at it, uzachartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam, right? You will look at it and you will be reminded of all God's commandments, and you'll do them. So what's the purpose of the tzitzit? It is to remind you that you have a special mission, you're part of a people that has a special mission, and that as a result, you have special obligations, right? God's commandments, you'll see them, you'll follow. The old people used to talk about, you have to remember something, you put a string around your finger and you'll see the string and oh yes. Then of course you have to remember, oh, I wanted to remember something. What was it that I wanted to remember, right? So thank goodness we now have our phones and we can put it in our phones and we remember what we meant to remember, right? So there's a wonderful comment Rashi makes about the word tzitzit. In other words, how is it? What's the connection between this fringe and particularly the techelet colored string and the commandments, right? Other than we see it and we remember, oh yeah, we're God's people, we have commandments, we better follow them. So Rashi does this, I think, very clever thing in which he says, well, there are 613 commandments, right? That's in the Torah. Of course, we have many others also of rabbinic origin, but 613 commandments. And let me just say a word about that. There are 365 of them, which are positive in nature, and 248 of them which are negative, right? The thou shalt do's and the thou shalt not do's, which corresponds to to the parts of the body in one case and the days of the year in another, right? The idea is that these commandments were meant to be done with your whole self and every day, right? It's supposed to encompass your life and fill your life. Okay, so Rashi says this: the word tzitzit in gematria is 600. What's gematria? It is a system where we assign a numerical value to every letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on. Yud is 10, and then the next letter, Kaf, becomes 20 and 30 and 40. And ultimately, the Taf at the end, the last letter is 400. So you can add up all the letters in a word, and you can get to a number. And there's a whole mystical tradition about using this on verses of the Torah, and as a result, being able to discover things which aren't on the surface, making connections between things which have words that have the same numerical value. There's all kinds of things that you could do with this. But Rashi says, well, if we add up, right, the Taf, Yud, Sadi, Yud, Taf, Sadi, Yud, Sadi, Yud, Taf, right? You get 600, right? You can take my word for it. I've done it. You really do get 600, right? So now, what are we gonna? We're not there yet. We want to get to 613, right? So we have 8 strands, right, and 5 knots on each one. And if you add it all up, you get 613. So Rashi, look at the tzitzit, right? And there you are, 613. It's fun, I think. The Torah probably doesn't intend that. The Torah simply wants to, because it doesn't tell us here, well, how many strings should there be? How many knots, right? This is a later rabbinic tradition. By the way, it's worth noting that according to rabbinic tradition, if you're wearing a tallis and if there aren't 5 knots, then you need to retie the end of it, right? It's supposed to be that way, right? So sometimes you'll see people, they'll come into synagogue and they'll put on a talit and then they'll go check the tzitzit, because they do tend to unravel over time. Now, the tzitzit the talitot that we see in synagogue, by and large, have white fringes, right? Because there's this idea that we lost the secret of how to make techelet, and therefore what we're doing isn't really completely fulfilling the mitzvah in the Torah. It's close to it. It's a reminder of it, right? There is a group in Israel who believes that they have, after extensive scholarly work, have come to the conclusion they know what techelet is. And they have begun to create tzitzit that have techelet in them. And I have to tell you, I have a pair that my talit, actually, I'm not inexpensive, but I felt worth it. I was able to get this, and I look at my tzitzit now when we, there's this tradition that when you come to the word tzitzit, you kind of gather them up and you kiss them. It says uritem oto, you look at them. So I look at them and I see the thread, and it's very satisfying to me. Whether it's really actually techelet, probably is, but no one can really say for sure. Okay, but that's kind of the act. Now, you may have heard, or you may do it or know someone who does it, that there's a tradition largely observed among Orthodox men, right? That you wear a garment under your clothing every day called the talit katan, small tallis, literally, which also has fringes on it, right? Because the idea, you could say, is that this is not just that you should put on a garment that has fringes, but that you should be wearing it all the time. It's worth noting that in the rabbinic period, it looks like people wore tefillin all day long, right? Similarly, they didn't just put on their tefillin in the morning for the morning service and then take them off, but they would wear their tefillin all day long. And certainly that isn't done anymore, to my knowledge, by anyone. But this idea that you should wear a 4-cornered garment and therefore will have the requirement of having tzitzit is something that people do. Those of us who do not wear a talit katan, in a sense, when you put on a tallis in synagogue or while you're praying at home, what you're really doing is putting on something that has four corners so that we'll have the obligation to have fringes on it. So you can, in some sense, fulfill this mitzvah once a day. The idea is here to be reminded of your obligations to God. And now, why do we need that reminder? And we're going to pick up now with the text, right? You will look at them, and you remember all God's commandments and do them. That you will not go, I think that here it is, you will not follow your heart and your eyes in your lustful urge, right? You won't follow your heart and your eyes, and zonim acharechem, right? Zonim, here it says to be lustful, right? Lust after, desire, covet what you see. The word zonim here is similar to the word zonah, which is a prostitute, right? We saw that, those of us who looked at the Joshua section parallel to the story of the scouts, they wind up, the two scouts that Joshua says, in the house of Rachav Hazona, the prostitute named Rachav, right? So here the idea is that when you look at it, you'll remember God's commandments, and that will keep you, right? The reminder of the commandments will keep you from following the inclinations of your heart and your eyes and doing stuff you're not supposed to do, right? So it's not just a reminder in a positive sense, it's also a reminder in a negative sense. Remember that you're God's people, that you have a certain role in the world, but also don't go do all these things that you have a desire to do, right? And this idea of desire is in some sense at the root of the 10 Commandments. It's the last commandment that kind of powers the others. Because you desire someone's property, you might come to steal, for example, right? So it's interesting, I think, one of the commentators notes that heart seems to come before eyes. You would think, well, you see it and you want it, but it's really your imagination which is drawing you more even than what you see. There's a hint here of the story of the Garden of Eden, right? As Eve is led to violate, right? She's not wearing tzitzit, right? She hasn't been reminded, but she sees the tree and she has to have it, and it overwhelms her. And apparently the snake was a great advertiser, really made it attractive and desirable, and she's led astray. So here the role of the tzitzit are to keep us on the straight and narrow, to remind us of who we are in the world, and to keep us from going. Now, it says you shouldn't follow the inclinations of your heart, but the word in Hebrew is taturu. And if you remember, the role of the scouts was latur et haaretz, to scout out, right? So that this is coming at the end of the section of the scouts, right? And it's going back, and it's kind of reminding us that they were led astray by the inclinations of their hearts and what they saw. They saw the people there, they thought they were giants. They felt that they were grasshoppers in comparison to them. That was the language of the Torah. And even that they, the giants, must have saw them, must have seen them that way, right? So that's a kind of concrete example of this. It does not say here that this is only a male thing to do. You might well read this and come to the conclusion that that everyone should be wearing fringes on the corners of their garments. The rabbis limit the obligation to men, and the way they do that is to say women in general are exempt from most positive time-bound commandments. That is, God says, do X at time Y, right? So it's positive. It's not stay away from something. Men and women have equal obligations in terms of not doing things that are bad, right? They should eat non-kosher food, everybody, not just men, right? But if it's positive, do it, and do it at a specific time. Then women who have all kinds of other obligations in terms of family and children and so on are exempt from that. So the rabbis say, well, here, the point is that you see the fringe and you remember, right? So it's only during the day and not at night, right? Because at night, in a world where they don't have electric lights, you can't really see it. And that becomes, by the way, the definition of when you say your morning prayers. One of the definitions is that when do you say Shema in the morning? Starting from the time that you can distinguish between white and techelet. If you can't see that difference, it's too early to pray. It's still too dark out. At any rate, it's about seeing it, and you need daylight. So it's a positive commandment, and it's limited in time. Therefore, women don't have this obligation classically. Does that mean they can't wear it? Well, clearly they can. It just means they're not obligated to wear it. This becomes more political than it becomes religious. There are, we lived in Massachusetts for a while. There was a local Orthodox congregation, which was quite left-leaning in many ways, very liberal. But some women started to wear talitot, and the rabbi told them they really can't do that. And they said, why? And he couldn't tell them that it was forbidden. He told them that it really wasn't good in the community. It didn't define the community in a way that it shouldn't be defined. Whether that's a good argument or not doesn't really matter, but the truth is they were standing on firm ground, right? Just because a person's not obligated to do something, there could be a question as to whether they should say the blessing, right? Because the blessing is, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us to wear tzitzit, right? You have to wear the blessing. Can you say the blessing? Certainly, according to rabbinic views, traditionally you couldn't, but you could put it on. So what about within the conservative movement? Should women be wearing talitot? In some ways, I think a strong argument can be made that they should. Once you say that women, in order to say that women have equal rights, you have to say that they're equally obligated, because rights and obligations are intertwined. So if you're going to say, for example, a woman can count to the minyan, then part of what you're saying is that she should be with the minyan when there's an obligation to be there, right? It's not just that she could be counted if she wants to be. So does she have to say Kaddish, for example, when she loses a family member? And the answer, I think, would be yes. Right? You can't have it both ways in some ways. All of that is just an aside, right? Because we're really focusing here on the biblical text. And you'll be reminded of all my commandments and be holy to your God. And then we get this final statement. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, am your God, right? It's kind of the end of this section and a reminder that we have obligations to God because God took us out of Egypt, made us God's people, and along with that come the obligations to follow the commandments, and the tzitzit here have the purpose of doing it. Now, before we go on with the next parsha, I want to share with you a remarkable midrash. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see if that works. I hope everybody can see that. Looks like I can, so probably you can. And this is a piece of midrash. It's a piece of the rabbinic fantasy, really, from Menachot 44a, which is a section of the Talmud. So, once a man who was scrupulous in observing the mitzvah of tzitzit heard that there was a prostitute across the sea who charged 400 gold dinarim, right? This is a lot of money, right? You can tell already, she's a very, very, very expensive woman in terms of what she charges for her services. So the man prepaid and scheduled an appointment, right? So this is a strange story. On the one hand, we have this righteous man, at least he's somebody who cares about tzitzit. On the other hand, he's being led astray out of the inclinations of his heart and the desires of his eyes. And he is willing to pay 400 gold dinar. She arranged 7 beds for him, 6 of silver and 1 of gold. Between each and every one, there was a ladder made of silver, and the top one was made of gold, right? So you can see that if you're willing to pay the price, you get ultimate luxury. And she lay naked on the bed of gold. Right? It's a very remarkable kind of image. The prostitute lay naked, the man began to undress. While doing so, his tzitzit hit him in the face. So he's wearing tzitzit, right? And he's getting undressed, and she's lying on the bed, and pow, right? The tzitzit pop up. And I have to think that, I'll put it delicately, encountering the sight of this beautiful naked woman, you might expect something else to pop up. But it's his tzitzit that pop up, and they slam him in the face, and he goes and sits on the floor. And she goes and sits on the floor, and she wants to know what defect he saw in her. Like, what? You paid the money? The word defect here is interesting because it's often used in the Torah. The word is mum, and it's used usually in sacrifices. What disqualifies a sacrifice is this kind of blemish. He says that he swears an oath. He's never seen a woman more beautiful than she. But with regard to the mitzvah of tzitzit, the Torah tells us, I am the Lord your God. I am the one who will exact punishment. I am the one in the future granting reward. The tzitzit were most successful in helping that, quote, you should not follow your heart and eyes in a lustful urge. So he explains to her essentially, no, you're really beautiful, but I have the tzitzit to remind me that I'm not supposed to do these things. And she says to him, I won't let you go until you tell me your name and the name of your city and the name of your teacher and the name of the study hall in which you study Torah. This prostitute apparently knows a lot about Torah scholars. She knows they have teachers and study halls and so on. So he writes it down, he gives it to her, and she now takes her possessions. And at 400 gold dinarim, it was a lot of possessions. She gives 1/3 to the government and 1/3 to the poor. Probably it was taxes. Then she goes to the Beit Midrash of Rebbe Chia, his teacher, And she demands to be converted. Right? She's had a conversion experience with this guy. She's gotten rid of most of her ill-gotten gain. He says to her, maybe you have seen one of my students. Right? Like what led you to this? And she hands him the piece of paper, and Rav Chia converts her and then says, go take possession of your purchase. Those same beds that she had arranged, I don't know what in other words, she says, go take possession of your purchase. It seems that he is perhaps saying this to her, maybe to the guy. And then the Gemara ends this way. This is the reward given to him in this world, in the world to come. I do not actually know how much, right? I think the idea here is when you do a mitzvah, you get rewarded here, but in the next world as well. So with Tzitzit, there's no obvious reward in this world, but in the next world you'll be rewarded. But here, this guy seems to get his reward. And that is that this woman that he wanted to sleep with has now converted to Judaism and become his wife. I have to say that I think this story, and I'm gonna put it back down so I can see you all. Let me do that. Where? Here, stop share. Okay, right. Well, before I tell you what I think about all this, I'm interested to know what you think about all this. Anybody have any thoughts on this quite remarkable midrash? Probably not something you expected to find in the pages of the Talmud. Certainly not something I expected to find in the pages of the Talmud. How does it strike you? If anyone wants to chime in. No comments. All right. So I think in part, the rabbis here are being playful. Right? It's a kind of elaborate fantasy. It's almost a joke, right? This idea, oh, well, he'll get rewarded in this world, right? The reward being to sleep with this beautiful woman. I don't think there's any possibility this ever happened. I don't think the rabbis intended us to think that it happened. I think that there's an element of humor in it, and deliberately so. But I also think that, I think there's actually an important implication to it as well, right? Notice what her motivation is for conversion and the fact that she's accepted. That's interesting, because there are those who will tell you that if a person wants to convert for marriage, they can't do it. And there are rabbis who will refuse to convert someone who just wants to marry a non-Jew. In this story, that doesn't seem to be a problem. Be that all as it may, underlying this story is a sense that the tzitzit are there to remind you of who you are. And presumably, when you take off your clothing and when you put it on every day, you do get that reminder. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little journey into the world of bawdy midrash. We're going to move on now to the next challenge to Moses' authority. Perhaps the greatest challenge in the wilderness to Moses' authority, and that is of Korach and his friends. We're starting chapter 16 now, 16 of the book of Numbers, a new parsha, as it happens. This really comes in the wake. I mean, it's important to remember that things have really been falling apart. Miriam has challenged Moses' authority. The people have challenged his authority, but now the challenge becomes extremely personal. It comes from within his own tribe, at least in part. And it's brought up by a guy named Korach. It's interesting, it's Korach, and he's together with Datan and Aviram. Datan in English is translated as Dathan. That's a name you may well know better than you know the name Korach. If you remember the Ten Commandments movie way back when with Charlton Heston, Dathan is one of the villains in that story, who challenges Moses there. Edward G. Robinson played Dathan, if that helps your memory, or maybe you never saw it anyway, right? I always wondered why, if Korach is the real villain here, Dathan is the one in the script, in the movie, who is chosen. And I actually think I know the answer. Korach is Korach, right? And if you're in Hollywood, you don't want a chet, right? Dathan, very nice, very easy to say in English. And so there we have it. Anyway, we're going to see Korach's challenge. V'yikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi. So Korach, who is the son of, we get a long genealogy here. Not just that he is the son of Levi in Hebrew, he's the son of Yitzhar, who is the son of Kahat, who is the son of Levi, right? So he has a pedigree. And I think that's important because part of why he feels entitled to challenge Moses' authority is that he is a blue blood. He's a Levite with this particular genealogy. And Moses, after all, is just another Levi, right? He's also got the same pedigree, though the line is different. Now, the English translation here is betook himself. And that is Korach, the son of Izhar, the son of Karat, the son of Levi, betook himself. That's very odd language. It's an attempt to deal with what is a problem, which is that the Hebrew is he took, but there's no direct object. We're not told what he took. Now Korah, the son of Levi, took, right? So that gives us a sense that he's grasping. He's a grasper. I just want to look for half a second. Give me half a second. I didn't think to do this before, but I think it's just interesting to do.
My Hurt says he took men.
Right. Yeah, so Robert Alter, in his wonderful modern commentary, says he took up. I don't know, you can fill in the ellipsis any way you want. Okay. So it is Datam Aviram, On, the son of Pelach, who are descendants of Reuven, right? So Datam Aviram and On come from the tribe of Reuven, right? So it's worth noting that whereas Korach is a Levite, right, descended from Levi, they're descended from Reuven, who was actually Jacob's firstborn, right? So they would be favored by the rules of primogeniture. The firstborn usually is the leader, right? So both of them have kind of claims on leadership, and they want to exercise it. So they rise up against Moses with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. This is a major challenge. 250 of them, first of all, an overwhelming number, and they're all blue bloods, right? So this is a coup, right? It's a coup. So what's going to happen? And they say to him, I'm sorry. They say to Moses and Aaron, Rav lachem, you've taken too much. You've taken too much on you. Here the translation is, you've gone too far, right? For the whole community is holy, all of them. The Lord is in their midst. Why do you raise yourself above the Lord's congregation? So the argument is, hey, what makes you so special that you should make yourself a leader over all of us? We're all holy. The whole congregation is holy. It's an interesting, first of all, well, two things, right? So one is it's kind of demagoguery, right? Because it's not that they want anarchy. It's not that they want everybody doing what they want to do because they're all holy and they don't have to listen to anybody, right? They want to be the leaders, right? The holiest of the holy, as it were. But it's also a kind of distortion of the idea of the Jewish people being holy. And it's interesting that this comes right after the Tzitzit, which is a reminder of the fact that we are Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh, a nation of priests, a holy people. Right? What does it mean to be a holy people? What it means is not that every one of them is inherently holy, but that they have a sacred mission as a people, right? They have the ability in some ways to be holy, to act holy, but they're not intrinsically holy. And by the way, this is, I think, the best argument against this notion that the Jews, in calling ourselves a chosen people, think that we're better than everyone else. No, we have a unique mission in the world. We have been chosen to carry God's word out to the world, to act in a way which is exemplary to the world, to draw others closer. But there's nothing inherently. There's a remarkable passage in Amos, the prophet Amos, who says to the Israelites essentially, what makes you so special? I brought you out of Egypt. I brought the Ethiopians from Kaftor. I have a special relationship with everyone. That's Amos's argument. I don't think it's what the Torah itself is saying, right? But I think what the Torah is saying is that we are not intrinsically holy. And Korach is saying, for his own rhetorical purposes, that the people is essentially intrinsically holy. No one is holier than anyone else. God is actually among them. So who the hell does Moses think he is, right? The Midrash here does some wonderful things with Korach, sort of trying to kind of expand the demagoguery here. So one thing they argue is that Moses is stealing all their money. Why? Because of all the tithes. You're worse than Pharaoh, says the Midrash, right? The taxes are too high and you're profiting, right? And in fact, at the end of his, later on, Moses is going to say, I never took a single ass from you, right? I didn't profit personally. Right? But of course, that's not what Korach says here. That again is the Midrash, the rabbinic imagination. The other argument they give, which I think is really clever, is they say they do it in the form of a question, the kind of question a person would ask a rabbi. So they say to Moses, and this, of course, there are no Torah scrolls at this moment, but doesn't stop them. They say, a house that's filled with Torah scrolls, does it need a mezuzah on the door? Right? Because after all, the mezuzah is just a small section of the Torah, right? So Moses replies, yes, yes. You could quote the verse, these words, I command you put them on your doorpost, right? And Korach ridicules it, right? It's ridiculous. The house is right. Then the next midrash, and this you can see the connection here to what came immediately before it. A garment which is made entirely of techelet. Does it still need a fringe of techelet on the corner? Right? Garment could be dyed any color. And again, Moses says yes, because it talks about the fringe, and Korach ridicules it. Right? The rabbis are, I think, reflecting their own culture, the idea that students ask rabbis questions. For them, Moses is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? You've probably heard that expression, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, Moses our rabbi, right? They view him in the rabbinic role. The Torah itself calls him Hanavi, right? The prophet. He's a lot of different things, and he is the teacher of Torah. That's certainly true. Anyway, they come with all these men. They challenge Moses. How does he respond? The way he always does. He prostrates himself. He hears them. He falls on his face. And then he talks to Korach and everyone else as follows. Boker, tomorrow, V'yodah Adonai et asher lo. God will make known who is his and who is holy and who grants him access to himself. He will grant access to the one that he has chosen. First of all, just a word about the Hebrew. Boker, not in the morning, morning, God will, right? You can almost feel the anger, I think, in the Hebrew, sort of sputtering. Right? He's been challenged. He's been through all of this, and now this. So what does he say? He says, okay, we'll see. There'll be, this is like a duel at dawn, right? Tomorrow, God is going to demonstrate how things really are. And he says to them, do this. You and your band take fire pans. If you look at the Hebrew, Kahu lehem, take, same vayikach Korach, and Korach took. So maybe there, as Saul suggested, he took men. But here Moses is saying, you want to take something? Take fire pans and tomorrow you'll put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord. So this is the kind of thing that a priest would do, right? Yes, but it also is reminiscent of a story. And that is the story, of course, of Aaron's two sons, right? Nadav and Avihu, who at the moment that the tabernacle was being consecrated, came out and brought what was called strange fire that God did not command. And as a consequence, they are destroyed. Right? They are themselves consumed by fire. It's a difficult story. I don't want to get into the story itself as to why that such a thing could have happened, should have happened, right? But you have to read this story with that in mind. Because in a sense, he's saying, put up or shut up. This dangerous stuff we're talking about here. And then he goes on to say to Korach, Simuna, you listen, right? Sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him to perform the duties in the Lord's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them? Right? Hey, you're not just everyday, ordinary people. God's given you a special role. And what's that role? To serve the people. Not to serve yourselves, to serve the people. He has advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you. You want the priesthood too. It's not enough for you to be a Levi. You want to be a Kohen, right? You're already special. So truly it is the Lord that you and all your company have banded together against. What is Aaron that you should rail against him, right? Well, not just railing against Aaron, they're also railing against Moses, but okay. His point is, hey, this is the way God set things up. God gave you a special role, and your rebellion is not, well, you want to be priests like Aaron is a priest. Your rebellion is against God. All right, so I am going to leave it here. We're going to come back to this next week because we're going to see really what happens. And that is a whole story in itself. So, and I need to end a little bit early because I have another Zoom to go on in 5 minutes. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. You will get an email from me with a link to the recording if you want to look at it. Probably it'll be on YouTube, but we'll see. One way or another, you'll get a link to get to it. And also the same login materials that you use this week for next week. Excuse me, but I will remind you of them. So have a great week. And I look forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. My
Thank you.
pleasure. And
So-
I hope I enticed you to study Talmud with that little piece of Midrash. You'd be amazed what you'll find there. Okay. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.